start with the boutique consulting firm.
Oh.
That was my first foot in
Yeah,
the door.
boutique
right?
and
Yeah.
BCG.
Yeah, so because also it's interesting, right? Because of many international students here. So
Yes.
there's a difference. At least when I moved from India to the US, there's a huge difference in how recruiting in general happens. At least my experience in India is you submit your resumes to 100,000 places and you get calls and you go in, right? And you figure it out. Whereas in the US, if you do that, what I've noticed is nobody really responds, especially where there's a huge influx of applications. So the whole idea of networking is very, very relevant in this market. That's the big change that I noticed. So the first, when I explained my story, the first time I recruited was less than a year after I completed my undergrad and I was in another job. That's when I tried to recruit with boutique consulting firms. So that was pretty straightforward. It wasn't as complicated. I just put in my resumes to a bunch of places. I didn't know people. I got a call back. I did practice some very basic case interviewing. But when I did the second round of recruiting in the US during business school, given NYU was a target school, but still, without doing the networking process properly, there is no way you can get called for an interview. And when we are in, so the other secret is when you're a first year or second year consultant in the firm, they ask you to go to these events and they ask you to meet with people, and the names that you remember, you put it in an internal tool. So there is a tool, and when folks go in and select candidates and prepare the interview list, they cross-reference these names, how many names were mentioned, right? So that's the importance of networking. So even though it's not a target school, there are a lot of ways, and even without attending events, I feel like if you just make a intentional reach outs, even on LinkedIn, it might be a very blind message. I receive a lot of blind messages that I respond to very happily because I just want to pass it forward, and there are a lot of kind people in the industry. So I think you should just send messages out to people who are either alumni of SIPA or Columbia at large, or from your other undergrad, or like some sort of, if you have any form of connection, send it. A few people will ignore, a few people will respond. For the people who respond, try to get a coffee chat, right? Either via phone or, virtual coffee, or on video, or if they are really nice, try to get invited to the office. You can then ask them to introduce you to folks who handle recruiting. There are specific people who are in charge of recruiting, whether it's associate recruiting, whether it's consultant recruiting. There are folks who are, and especially target schools, they have their representatives, but even otherwise, there are recruiting directors, there are recruiting teams, right? So ask them to introduce you to those people, not necessarily just recruiters, but consultants or seniors who are in charge of recruiting. And then you talk to them. So that's the other path of getting your foot in the door, like very practical. But obviously it requires a lot of work from your side. So that's the one tip of like trying to get interviews. Now, if you do get an interview, obviously case is, I forget the resource, this is so bad, but I know there were like a bunch of like, so different schools have case books, right? And you kind of get them online. I think you'll get all the business schools, there are usually case books that you can just practice. And casing on your own is not helpful at all, because that doesn't put you on the spot. You need to find people who are at your level or better than you, and that's how you raise up, and you need to practice, because doing the math, even though it's simple, when someone's staring at your paper, is very different from doing it by yourself. So just, and even I think the interviews are still this way. I don't know how different I mean, I recruited in 2017 for BCG. I don't know post-COVID how much has changed, but throughout the case interview, you can pause, but you're expected to talk through your thinking. Like what are you thinking? What's in your mind, right? So that whole experience cannot, I mean, you can only practice it through facing other people and try to like find people who are at your level or better than you, and then just rise up. Yeah, so that's the tip when it comes to just case prep. There's obviously the other huge section of behavioral questions, and also like resume. Okay, maybe I attack resume first. So resume, exactly what you mentioned. You need to have points that speak to something that makes sense in the consulting world. Like how do you improve a certain process, or like how did you take initiative and figure out and create. It might be a simple Excel model, but even if that's being used somewhere continuously, it's improved something. What's the efficiency that it created? So those kind of messages, if you're able to communicate, it's definitely very helpful in the resume. And that's when you also have your spiel ready for like, tell me about yourself. Yeah. So that is a clear path to like, yeah, this is my background, and this is why I'm interested in so and so. Don't just talk about yourself. Like that's it's always a path to transition. So have that practiced. Obviously, don't sound very rehearsed, because just think about the recruiter. They're also talking to like hundreds of people, and they don't want to hear the same story. So make sure you're being authentic with your experience, but at the same time, practice enough so that you're able to convey the right points that hit the high note, right, with the recruiter or the other people that you're coffee chatting with. Also take the coffee chats very seriously. They're also like interviews. They're not, hey, how are you? Those are not the meetings. They're serious. Everyone's assessing whether you're a good fit or not, right? So that's the whole like resume, other side of interview. Behaviorals are also, so you'll find on YouTube a lot of resources, right? There are a lot of consultants, consulting interview prep, behavioral interview prep, the typical behavioral questions that come up. Like tell me about a time when you had a challenging situation in your team. Most typical, like, did you get that? I got that, right? So that's the most typical interview question. So have a few stories, like have 3 or 4 or 5 stories that are key highlights of your experience, and based on the question, figure out how to elevate one aspect of it so that it ties to the question. So it's those 5 stories, how do they map to the typical questions, and make sure that they answer, right? So that's, and be genuinely interested in the firm. Try to show how, whether it's somebody who came and spoke to you, or it's some report that they published, or something. So like show genuine interest, because that then again helps you stand out. Oh, she read about it, or like he's heard about it, right? So and ask them about their day, their work, things that make them feel happy. Why are they continuing to work in the company? So those are the kind of questions that you can ask them, because there's a huge chunk of time for once they ask you all the questions, they're like, okay, do you have any questions for us? So make sure that's also, prepped up and you have some good questions ready to go.